give them away. So yeah.
Kim, was there any public comments? I didn't see it in my email.
No, there were no public comments.
Liz, you're a good role model for me.
I don't like to dust.
Yeah, that's a hazard of having all the dust catchers.
All right, good evening, everybody. It is 5 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and just get started with our usual beginning of the meeting updates, which are, this meeting is being recorded as well as live streamed to YouTube and will be available to the public after this meeting. During the meeting, please use the raised hands function. That way we can manage the conversation a little better and prevent some crosstalk. And with that, John, please take it away.
Thank you, Kim. Well, welcome everyone. I can't believe it's been 9 months already since we met, and we're pretty much halfway there. So we have another 9 months to go. Our task is to be a part of this initiative for the next for the 18 months. And so we're midway point right there. So congratulations on meeting that midpoint. We're in autumn, so I'm glad to see all the faces, and I want to wish everyone well and healthy. It's good to see everyone today. And we are going to start off with a centering exercise. So I'd like to invite you to join me in a center exercise for a conversation time. First, I will read a statement, and then I ask you to join me in the breathing exercise to help bring focus and thoughtfulness to the conversation of today. So today we convene to listen and learn from each other through reflection and discussion. As we reevaluate and improve our public safety practices, we elevate the voices and experience of the communities who have been and continue to be disproportionately impacted by inequitable systems. We thank you all, those who have advocated and worked on dismantling injustice in Tigard and our broader community. We build off of their efforts to create more equitable and just outcomes for people of all backgrounds and abilities. The purpose of our meeting is to develop our understanding of current public safety structure, practices, and procedure, to identify and eliminate institutional racism within Tigard public institution by centering equity and racial justice, to bring forth the concern and experiences of ourselves and our community, and bring recommendation to the city leadership to improve the lived experience of people in Tigard. Now we will do a breathing exercise together. So you may turn off your camera for this portion. Close your eyes and gaze softly downward. Feel the chair under your legs. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Feel your hand on your lap. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Slowly open your eyes and begin to breathe normally. Thank you all for participating in creating space for me. So with that, I'm going to ask Kim if you could go ahead and do the roll call for us.
Of course. Commander McDonald?
Here.
Officer Nunn?
Here.
Shelby Rahala?
Here.
Michael O'Brien?
Here.
Emilio Calderon?
Here.
Liz Newton?
Here.
John Trin?
Here.
Jimmy Brown? Lee Landers won't be joining us. Patty Lofgren?
I'm here.
Justin Lowe?
Present.
Danny Rauda?
Here.
Valerie Sasaki?
Here.
Sean Stoldreyer? Nick Jarmer?
Here, thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff Mott?
Here.
And that is roll, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. To my understanding, there were no one who signed up for public speaking tonight. So tonight, there's no community member who joined to speak to us. Public comments are vital to the board mission, and we welcome community feedback on our work. So if you have comments for the board, written testimony must be submitted by 4:30 the day of the scheduled meeting. If you'd like to speak at our meeting, please email our staff, eduardo@tigard-or.gov. That's EDUARDOR at tigard-or.gov. Additional detail and instruction are available on the Tigard website. That's www.tigard-or.gov/PSAB. All right. So Kim, can you introduce the topic brought forward by a board member? Is that time, or you want to do it at the end?
We'll do that at the end. We only have the chief for the first half of the meeting tonight, so I want to make sure we use her time effectively.
All right.
So we'll have with the chief's update.
All right. So all the way from Ben, Chief, can you give us an update, please?
I would be happy to. The only good news is I think my reception is better than it is in Sandy, and I can actually see you and speak to all of you. So hopefully I come across as clear as you guys are coming across to me. Thank you. Yes, I'm at a kind of a retreat on legislative strategies for the upcoming 2022 and 23. This is part of my growth in the legislative part of this. So very riveting, and I won't bore you with the rest of it. But with that, obviously, you've now been made aware, as everybody has, that the Attorney General's office completed their investigation, and their final step was to take it and present the case to a grand jury, which was held in Washington County. And so that happened, has it been now 2 weeks ago? And it took 2 full days of them presenting the information, and about roughly 10 minutes to come back with a decision. It's a confidential process. Thus, we had about a 2-week notice that subpoenas were going to go out, and that this was a process that they were going to employ, was the grand jury process. So with that, I also wanted, I thought that the Oregonian, who had already done their public records request, had done a broad overview. So we just went ahead and sent you that link, which is about a 4-page article, but it gives you very broad as kind of a framework. And then also to just explain the next steps. And I've asked Jamie, who as the service commander will chair our use of force board. So, and to put in context, so I finally have the packet that I've always said I don't have the documents. There's about 4,000 items. And so going over all of this is pretty extensive. But that's why we won't convene a use of force board immediately, because one, we need to review everything, see if there's any follow-up questions for both procedures and policy, and then convene the board. So we all have to have a chance to read it as well. But Jamie, would you go ahead and just kind of review the next steps so the board can ask any questions?
Sure, Chief. Yeah, like the chief said, we the team here at the PD will review all of the documents that we've received, and it is incredibly extensive. It's the entirety of the investigation that the major crimes team conducted at the direction of the district attorney's office, and everything that was forwarded to the attorney general's office for them to be able to use as a part of the grand jury proceedings. So the internal review will consist of a use of force review board, which is it's dictated by policy. So we actually have a policy that tells us what that process will look like. It's not something that we just make up as we go. So there's actually a policy in there that tells us the construct of the use of force review board, and then what the use of force review board is doing. They're reviewing that to make sure that everything that we did specific to that particular use of force was within policy or was not. That's what they're charged with. So if they determine that there was something that was done outside of policy, then we would then turn that into an actual internal investigation to determine if there's discipline that's appropriate for it. But in addition to that, the other things that we're going to be looking for are there training points that we can take out of it? And we do this with any use of force. As we talked about when we spoke about force review by supervisors, we're constantly doing that. And every time an officer uses force, we review that to make sure that it's within policy, within our use of force policy. And if we identify training points that need to be addressed, that's when those are documented, and then it's referred for training to the training team and to the appropriate training team, whichever that may be. And so we'll be doing the same thing as a part of this process. It will just look a little different because the use of force review board will be having that the first opinion on it, where they get to say yes or no, it was within or was not within policy. And then it will fall back. If there's training points to be taken out of that, then those are the types of things that we'll be taking to our training team to be able to move forward in terms of making sure that we correct any training deficiency that may or may not be there. So that's a very high level overview as we start to digest these thousands of pages of documents to go through. So we're very preliminary in that process in terms of where that's at. The board the use of force review board will need plenty of time to review all those before I actually call them together to have them come sit in the room and have a presentation from Lieutenant Charlton, who is going to be the one that will be presenting basically the fact pattern for it. And when he does that, they will have all had the opportunity to read through the entirety of the packet to be able to ask him any questions that may have come up. But it'll be a presentation to them to make sure that everyone has the same base of knowledge when they're making a decision about whether or not the force used was appropriate based on policy. And as we talked about, policy is often looks different than what the law says, right? We have some different things within our policies that are different from what Oregon or federal law says, and that's done on purpose, right? So that's where that's at, and it's going to take us a little bit of time. It'll be several weeks before we convene the board, just to make sure that everyone's had the opportunity to read through all of the documentation. Since everyone has a full-time job in addition to reading these thousands of pages, that also has to be taken into consideration, so everyone can be appropriately prepared when it's time to pull the board in and convene them for their actual decision-making process. So, any questions?
And one thing I want to say that's unique about this is the actual officer, who is the only one that deployed, in this case, the deadly use of force, is no longer a department member. But again, other force was used, and we want to review that. But we also believe it's extremely important to review the entire totality of the situation, whether or not that particular employee is still with us. We need to do that for ourselves to learn from anything, to make any changes, policy or training wise, and to move forward. So we'll go ahead and do that process no matter what. The other part of this is we're aware that the family has an attorney. And so I don't know, Shelby, if you can talk to it or just confirm that I'm pretty limited then on what I can talk about, even though the media and others can do public disclosure requests, but they have retained an attorney, and that kind of puts me on notice as well. Is there anything more you need to say about that, Shelby? Okay.
We have a question from Valerie.
So that anticipated at least two of my questions, but I guess from a timing perspective, Shelby, is there concerns about the process moving forward on the civil side and then the internal process moving forward? And is there any action between those two?
No, there's no interaction between the two. They'll be done separately. We have received a notice of a tort claim
Right.
which under Oregon law is required before an actual claim is filed in court. And so we have the notice, but not an actual claim. So they have, I believe, 2 years from the date of the incident to file a claim or an actual complaint in court. And so the potential litigation could be pending for quite some time, but the internal investigation will continue separate of that.
Sure. Okay. And then I guess one of my other questions is for Commander McDonald, because you talked about convening the board, but who is the board? Where do they come from?
So it's constructed of, and I'm going to do this off the top of my head since I don't have the policy directly in front of me, but we have internally, we have a command level person from within that division that wasn't involved in the incident. We will have a supervisor from the patrol division that was not working at that time. So it'll be a sergeant.
Mhm.
We'll have an instructor in that particular discipline as a part of the board. There'll be a member of the union, and then there's an outside agency representative that'll be a command level person from another agency. And we've got a couple of those people identified specifically, but not all of them yet. So, but that's by policy, that's the board, the use of force review board that will be that'll be convened.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then, you talked about the possibility of discipline, right? Which, as the chief mentioned, is more difficult because the officer involved has left the agency. Are there things related to the contract that still have, where there's still the potential for consequences for him, even though he's left the agency, if the agency determines that there's something that should have happened that didn't happen that he was supposed to do, or is he just gone?
Well, I mean, we'll make a determination regardless. Now, whether or not there can be any level of accountability for the employee that's no longer with us it's unlikely, right? Because that's an employment. Basically, that has to do with their employment. And so the discipline impacts their employment here at the city of Tigard. So there wouldn't be an opportunity for us to discipline that person. But if we were to determine that anyone was in violation of policy when we do our investigation, we're going to identify that, regardless of whether or not they're still employed here, because it's important that we identify if there was something that was done incorrectly.
Sure. So I guess the principal advantage then is improvement of processes and systems going forward then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Valerie. And John, please.
Two questions. You talk about in terms of convening the board. Is any of the member of the board, are you putting a racial lens on for the board in terms of selecting a person of color or whatnot like that?
Well, if we can. The part of the problem we have with this particular incident is it was so staff intensive in terms of the number of people that were involved and that were there, and then the people that were there in the support end of it. It makes it actually kind of hard to convene a board where the right subject matter experts weren't involved in the incident itself. So yes, but that comes with an asterisk because we have to make sure that they weren't involved in the incident themselves, right? We want to have people that are completely uninvolved with that particular incident, and that needs to be the priority for it, so that we don't have somebody that was there in a support role or doing something else that night. So because there were so many officers on scene and involved that night, and so many others that responded in a support role, we're limited on, we can really constrain the number of people that we can use to be able to help us with this process that are still subject matter experts in that area.
Sure. No, and then my other question, thank you for that. My other question would be in terms of, I understand in terms of there's a lot of documents that need to be reviewed. Everyone has a full-time job. Is there within the policy a time frame of when this needs to be completed so it doesn't drag out?
There is not, but I will tell you this, that the chief has a vision, and I have assured her that I will do everything I can to meet that vision. Although I think it's a little ambitious, but we're going to try and get there as expediently as possible. So,
Okay.
so there isn't anything specifically in policy, John, but it's something we'd like to complete as timely as we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Commander.
and I'll just add to that, as you recognize, it's been 8-9 months. And so if there were policy decisions to be made or changed or training, we're already behind the 8 ball. We've been continuing to do current practices for 9 months. So you can imagine, now that I have the material, I would not want to wait any longer. It's not fair to the organization, it's not fair to the officers, and it's not fair to the community. So I have to, as Jamie alluded to, what is reasonable for me to dictate, somebody reading 4,000 pieces of document to convene a board within, 6 weeks. So I'm trying to be reasonable, but put a little pressure to say, this is a high priority. So put away your other stuff and try and get through this. But we also don't want to just, make it look like it just went through the process. I want people to read this material. I want people to absorb it. I want to come with thoughtful interaction and a total review of, are there things that we can do better? Are there things tools in place? We know we have body worn cameras now. So there's other things that we have in place that weren't available that night. So all of those things will be reviewed and presented as an acknowledgement. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, thank you. This would be either for Commander or you, Chief. I think you both know that last year and a half, 2 years, DPSST has put out a lot more requirements for our officers, a lot of reporting kind of things. I'm kind of curious, has DPSST reached out to you for this in this incident, or is this something that they're even involved in for, I think, like you said, Commander, maybe some of the other officers that are still employed with Tigard PD?
And before we answer, can we also clarify the acronym DPSST?
Sure. Department of Board Standards and Safety Training. I might have had it backwards there.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can take that. So, again, this doesn't happen very often. So, Nick, it's a great question. First and foremost is, if you guys recall, we were the second officer involved shooting since the new House bill was created, House Bill 4301. And so, needless to say, I've been having significant conversations with sheriffs and chiefs and DAs saying, if you haven't reviewed that, if you have not talked to your DAs on how they interpret the new law, which, as you recall, I think, not to put words in DA Barton, but I think in his press when he said he had concerns. The concerns were as the law was written and it was applied to this incident that causes him pause, and wanted the Attorney General to review it under the new criteria of the law. So of course I didn't want anybody else to be caught off guard, have those conversations, vet this out. So there's a lot of that going on. As far as DPSST, they'll only get involved on if there was a policy. So as Commander McDonald relayed, if there was something so egregious that the officer did that I felt they would be terminated for, I might be able to pursue that, even though he hasn't been able to defend himself. But I could say, I recommend, I would sustain it, termination, something like that. That's only the area that I can see where there's recourse. And of course, I would have to work with the attorneys and HR to even say, is that within your wheelhouse? But at the time he was employed, if I felt he was so egregious and something like that, and the board came with, he didn't listen to the sergeant, he didn't do this and this, which is not the case. So I don't even want to plant that in your guys' mind. But there is a mechanism where we would look at his certification under DPSST. So there is a little bit of that they would look at. And of course, as always, we always like to interact with different agencies. We're in the Washington County Consortium. And so if there's the ability to share with anybody else lessons learned, we try and do that, because, if we can all avoid any officer involved shooting, or any force that leads to the death of an individual. We would all rather learn from somebody else and go through it ourselves.
Are there any other questions about the officer involved shooting in the investigation? All right, Chief, I believe you had one more update for the group.
Maybe Valerie has hands up.
Oh, sorry, Valerie.
Yeah, no, sorry. I wanted to circle back on the process for this. Is the lessons learned out of this, is that going to be publicly available for people, or is that going to be just incorporated in process into the department's procedures if there are improvements that can be made? And I guess that's in part a question for Shelby, because you know, there is a tort claims notice that's been filed, so you don't necessarily want to set the stage for anything, but you know, I think to the extent that we can learn from this, I think we'd also like to learn from this.
Yeah, so I would say it'll totally depend on the types of recommendations and where we are in litigation.
Yeah.
There is, under Oregon law, generally corrective actions are encouraged and not to be viewed, not to be held against a party. And so if there are corrective actions like that we could take, we will do so. But I would say at this point, I can't give a definitive
Sure.
answer
Sure.
because we don't know what it's going to say.
Oh, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
All right, Kim, can you remind me what my second one was, or were you relying on me? Because now I'm just true.
Body
Oh,
cam.
you know what your second one is? It's ghost guns.
Oh, yes, thank you so much. Okay, so again, you know, I really value this board, and part of, I think, is also educating on what we're seeing current trends. And so we became aware, you know, when I went off to the FBI law enforcement executive directors, we really talked about technology advancing and how does that impact, you know, policing and law enforcement. And specifically, we were talking about like 3D printers and printing guns. And so there was this, you know, conversation in a bigger context of these 3D printed guns. And we just came across it last week in Tigard, and then Beaverton as well. So I had asked Commander McDonald to prepare just a picture of what that looks like and a small education so that you can see how alarmingly accurate this looks like. And these are all in the hands of our youth. And should we encounter them, we wouldn't be able to differentiate between that and ghost guns can be functional. So I'm gonna not take Jamie's thunder, but Jamie, if you wanna show that photo.
Yeah, Kim's gonna hook me up because I didn't want to take the risk of my technological capabilities. So that right there is actually a picture of the gun that we found on a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 15 or 16-year-old kid that was contacted by one of our officers in the parking lot of Fowler last week, Monday or Tuesday of last week. And the thing that's concerning for us, well, a couple of things. One, that looks very much like the firearm that I'm carrying right now. That one is not currently capable of firing, but it could be made capable of holding ammunition and shooting. So it's completely untraceable by the ATF. So people can buy those components and be able to build those and complete them on their own. So they're completely unregulated. And but I will tell you what, that gun right there looks very real to me. It looks very much like the firearm that all of our officers carry on duty. And I will tell you this, from any level of distance, without actually inspecting that, you cannot tell that from whether it's a real gun or a ghost gun that is not yet completed, or I don't know, maybe it's it could be like a BB gun, because they make some that look just like that as well. So anyway, there's a photo of it. That's the actual one that we encountered that youth with last week.
And Nick, if you guys don't remember, Officer Nunn is a school resource officer. And I know, Nick, you're communicating with like the Beaverton SRO. This is an active investigation, so we're not going to get into the nuances of this one. But Nick, anything else that you want to add regarding even the education to our students, creating some level of awareness?
Yeah, no, I think he touched on it. The only thing is that is I mean, it might not be capable of shooting, and that's just because it's missing a few parts, but you can get those online. And the day after we located that one, the Beaverton SRO called me to inform me that they had located a student that also had a ghost gun. And, you know, they tried interviewing him. They got some information from him, but not a lot. And I'm not sure at this point if his was the same way where it was missing pieces or if his was completed. So, but I think that's it. I mean, they're easy to get, and you just need a few parts to make it workable. I think that one's missing like a firing pin or something, but that's it. And then it would be an actual firing weapon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question or comment from Patty.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm interested in how this came about, how it was reported, and a little bit about sort of, since this is a new technology in the world, what are the legalities of it if it's not a firing arm? And this is just fascinating to me. I'd like to hear just a little bit more about the situation. I live blocks from Fowler Middle School, so.
As I said, it's an active investigation, so the particulars on that one we can't talk about right now, to include, you know, any follow-up, whether ATF or anybody else wants to get involved in any of these. The simple fact that they're juveniles in and of themselves, they should not be in possession of that. But, you know, yeah, I think as we learn more and learn more in this investigation, we'll be happy to share, because the more we can educate our community, the better off we all are.
And even though it's considered a ghost gun, regular laws apply. Once you put it together, it becomes a firearm. So whether it's ATF certified or not, if you're in possession of it, it's considered a firearm.
Thank you. And Jeff, please.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to ask kind of clarifying questions too, more broadly. So if you consider a fully functional ghost gun a gun, then the laws apply. So you could confiscate something if they didn't have the proper permits and license and all that. So, but since this one wasn't, and maybe we just remove it and say, if you find another one that's not fully functional, if it's a minor, can you confiscate it? If it's an adult, can you confiscate? Or like what's the process for that?
Yeah, Jeff, you know, there's specific laws that apply. So the reality is that you and I we can possess one if it's not a fully functional firearm, right? It isn't considered a firearm until it's capable of actually being used as a firearm. And that's what makes it so challenging for us, because a 15 or 16-year-old kid has that and is playing with it or pulls it out and, you know, menaces someone with it. That, I mean, it may as well be a real firearm. I mean, I look at that and like I said, it looks just like the gun that I've got on right now. So, yeah, there are laws that surround those, but that's perfectly legal to be able to buy one like that and to be able to complete it yourself within federal law, within state law, and you can build it yourself. So now somebody under the age of 21 cannot. They can't legally possess a handgun at that age. So, I mean, there's some different legalities in that area, but it's a new frontier for us in terms of this type of firearm and this type of concern. And we're seeing more and more of them. and they're becoming more readily available. Like Nick said, you can buy them online. I could probably Google it and find 15 different ones inside of a minute that I could purchase. So.
Thank you. And Sean, please.
Thank you. Did that have an action slide where you could pull the slide to the rear and hold it back and let it pop forward, where it could be used to menace a potential victim?
You know, I didn't see it. I didn't get to put my hands on it. So I don't know if you actually could action the slide and have it slide forward. So I don't know if it had those pieces. Nick, do you know, did you actually get to put your hands on it?
Oh, Nick, you're on mute.
No, but the picture that was shown had the slide, and the slide was actually forward. So I think it just didn't have the internal firing in that one.
Yeah.
But it had the slide and everything on it.
Yeah, it seemed like it was probably one. I mean, heck, you can menace without pulling the slide. I mean, that gun, that right there could easily have menaced someone, and could have ended up horribly if it was, you know, the wrong situation. So
I guess my concern is it could be used, even though it couldn't shoot somebody, it could be used to coerce somebody to not run away, not call for help, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, that could be very dangerous.
Do a robbery. I mean, it's not a real gun, but it certainly looks like it. So yeah, it concerns us too, for sure.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Sean. Valerie, please.
So I guess the first thing I wanted to say is thanks and congratulations to the officer who was actually involved in that incident, because you can see how it could have gone much, much worse than it did. You know, and from my perspective, and this is more of a comment than a question, but, you know, I think this reiterates to me the importance of training and judgment when it comes to how the officers that are actually on the ground dealing with these things. Because, you know, if it's not one of these, and I think there's always going to be a better mousetrap that someone's going to build. But the fact that this was resolved without reported incident, and so I'm assuming that there wasn't, you know, horrific consequence to this, you know, is a testament to training and judgment.
Thank you, Valerie. John?
Yeah, my question is pretty much on the same line with Valerie. The question would be in terms of, is there any policy or training or practices that the PD is doing regarding this new technology?
Well, yes, and that's why when it was first discovered in patrol, and I had a lot of questions. I'm not a gun aficionado, so I had questions. It was brought up again with the FBI, so I know it's a new technology. And if I'm asking questions, I can only imagine. And I wanted to educate our officers, because in that particular incident, I don't know if Nick was the only one there or only one or two officers, but we need to share that knowledge. So we created a bulletin just showing that picture, what it looks like, as much information as we had. And so that went out to the entire police department.
Yeah, and then just one quick thing on that too, to follow up with what the chief says. The hardest part about that is from even 2 feet away, that looks like a real gun. It looks like the Glock 19 that I currently am carrying. And that's the scariest thing for us, right? So trying to educate our officers and the community about what's out there and creating that awareness so that people can ring the bell if they need to, if they know that, especially if kids are in possession of something like that we definitely want to know about it, so that we can do that follow-up and make sure that we're keeping those kids safe. That those 16-year-old kids that are getting their hands on stuff like that need to, we need to be able to have a conversation with them and potentially connect them to the appropriate services that they need to be connected to. So.
Thank you, Commander. And Justin.
Thank you, Commander, for sharing more about this update. And I would also like to second what Valerie mentioned in terms of this being a testament to training, decision making, and also just good judgment. In terms of this new proliferation that y'all are experiencing, I'm just curious, since you said that Beaverton had also come across an item similar to this, if there have been other incidents and occurrences with these ghost guns within the county, and if there's any, as you all mentioned, you're going through the process of doing an investigation and then going to share out with neighboring municipalities about best practices and to hopefully prevent any further consequence as to what Valerie alluded to. I'm just curious if there have been any other local police departments that have also reported in the area, maybe shared any best practices, or if the county has shared anything as well.
Nothing that I'm aware of. We do know the FBI had done a pretty extensive bulletin for us just on ghost guns in general, what they're seeing across the country. And so again, to actually bring it home and bring it into Tigard was the first time we came across it. And again, sharing it with Beaverton. So I think we're just now experiencing this. And so those conversations either between analysts and certainly at the chief and sheriff level are just beginning to happen.
Hey, Chief, I think this is the second one we've discovered. We had another incident earlier this year with a ghost gun.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Sean, please.
This is just a comment. It may or may not be helpful or pertinent, but a friend of mine recently purchased a 3D printer on Amazon and had it shipped to his house. And he downloaded a free app, an AutoCAD drawing, and he's able to teach himself, how to do CAD. And this is not somebody with any engineering background. And you can also purchase designs off the internet, different ways. And you put this into this 3D printer, and it'll make you whatever you want out of the types of materials we're getting. It wasn't steel, but it was, like carbon fiber and things like this. And so anyways, it certainly seems to me the technology is changing. Of course, my friend, so far, I've just seen a picture of a better cup holder for his car. But anyways, the technology is definitely changing and getting more accessible.
Thank you, Sean. Emilio, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak as, a resident high schooler. I looked at the picture of the ghost gun you saw, and I was very confused why you were showing an actual gun when you were talking about ghost guns. Come to realize that was not an actual gun. So yeah, that was just very concerning to me because I know for a fact that me and all my friends would not know the difference. So I'm very glad that you guys worked to get it away from high schoolers. And just like Sean said, I know I have friends with 3D printers. I know they're good people and they wouldn't do anything bad. My friend personally uses it to print figurines for his D&D set for his game nights with friends. But it is concerning that technology is growing, and I've heard about ghost guns before, and it's worrying that it is coming into our community, but I trust that you guys are doing the right things, and thank you guys so much on behalf of all high schoolers.
Thank you, Emilio. And Justin, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Emilio, for sharing your thoughts and comments. As a student, I think this is very pertinent in particular to you and your peers. This is sort of a comment, but also could be a standing question. Given the response that the chief had mentioned and Officer Nunn as well about the prevalence in the area, I think one of the things that I would hope the department and city are mindful of as they investigate and look more into how prevalent ghost guns are in the local community, is that I would hope that there is not a reactionary response either from the department, city, or community members in terms of drastic changes in policies and or acts that are called upon for public safety before full investigation and full research is done into the prevalence of this issue, especially when I think about how it relates to students, SROs, and the concept of monitoring students, especially if this is what it's been associated with, as ghost guns with youth. And so I mentioned that just as a comment of caution and concern, especially as someone who, even though I'm not like Emilio, who is still in high school, is also currently a student at a university. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Any other questions or comments or discussion around ghost guns? All right, seeing none, John, I think we can move on to the next point in our agenda. Oh, Chief, are you signing off? Is that goodbye? Thank you very much, Chief.
Take care, Chief. All right. And I apologize, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Are we moving on to discussion on body cam?
Yes, yes. We had left the conversation 2 weeks ago you had seen the updated body cam policy, and we were opening it up for any further discussion.
Right. The commander will lead us in the discussion, or we just opening for discussion right now.
It's open for discussion. I was thinking it would be more board led, as folks have had now 2 weeks to review the document.
Sure. All right.
So if there are, yeah. So if there are any other comments.
Yeah.
Jeff, please.
Thank you. So I had the time over the last couple of weeks to take a look at all the changes, and I first just want to say thank you. I made a red, yellow, green scorecard like last time, and almost all the things we brought up as a group are green. So thank you for the work you did and for the changes you made. I mean, things around muting, I think, is a good compromise around stating the reason to mute. The training, defining, timelines around the auditing of footage. I mean, the list goes on. Like, there's a ton of stuff that you changed, and so I appreciate it. There are two things that come to mind that I'd like to discuss, and the first one is around the use of footage before writing a police report. So I guess my first question on that is, when are reports typically made? Are they made kind of like at the end of the day when you're done with your shift, or do you do it after the interaction?
So it largely depends on the incident, but typically it's closer to the end of the shift, right? So you may have had several calls in between going back and reviewing that. So yeah, typically officers don't have the time to finish the call, sit down, write their report right then. Usually I'm going to be separated by maybe multiple calls before I get an opportunity to sit down and write that report. So it could be, yeah, it could happen. Our afternoon shift is on right now. A couple of officers could go on a call, have 15, 20 minutes worth of body cam video, and then be call to call until the end of the shift and have to write their reports at, say, 10:30, 11 o'clock tonight. And that's when they would be going back. That's actually a very common occurrence to have something like that happen. Not to mention the fact that the technology takes time to upload so that they can actually review it while they're seated at a computer. It's great technology, and it actually works great wirelessly, but it's just still slow. I mean, it's high def video, so it just takes time. We're limited by technology to an extent as well.
Okay. Sorry, my daughter's making spaghetti. So everybody's gone. My 7-year-old is out at soccer practice right now, which sounds like a nightmare. I don't know how hard it's raining at your house, but it's pouring over here. The reason I bring it up is in general, I would say police officers' word is seen as truth. And I think it's important to trust and rely on police in that way. The reason to bring up using the footage afterward is to make sure the officer has a chance to write down from their memory. And then if they need to later add additional commentary using the footage, just to make sure that there's not that, because oftentimes it's great that the police officer's word is truth. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the police officer could be lying. So the purpose of using it afterward is to mitigate that view, I guess, when it's not appropriate. Does that make, am I saying that right? I feel like I rambled on about that.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, Jeff. And I can tell you this, that in training, we train the officers, you still need to use your notebook, because what happens if that technology, if some reason fails, your battery goes dead or something halfway through the call, and now you have to rely on your notebook and the notes that you took. So that's still an expectation, is that you're still documenting it with your notes. And I can tell you that in practice and watching most officers, they're sitting there typing away on their report, and then they may go, oh, I'm going to go back and review that because I want to make sure that that's exactly what this person said. Or even better, in a case like maybe myself, what did I write down here? And maybe going back and listening to a minute or so, oh yeah, that's what I wrote down there. Right? Because I've been caught in that situation where I'm like, man, I do not know what I wrote here. And I'm sitting there trying to decipher what my handwriting was. And it ends up maybe not making it into a report because I couldn't read my own handwriting, or it was wet when I was out there writing it down and it got smudged like it is right now. So anyway, in practice, many of the officers, and I see that Nick probably wants to say something too, but many of the officers are actually writing their report and using that, like you said, kind of as that reference, rather than, they're using their notebook as to refresh exactly what they heard. And then maybe they're using that video as the reference to make sure, to check that, to make sure that it's correct. Is that accurate, Nick? I mean, based on what you're doing, you're the one that's out using it every day.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention that it's a great source to quote people. So sometimes we want to quote what they responded or how they responded. And when you're writing in your notebook, you can't always get the accurate quote, but if you can go back and listen to the recording, you can get exactly what the person said when you asked them a question. So it's great for getting quotes to write down in your report.
Cool.
Because most officers, we remember the observations that we have, vividly, right? But like Nick says, that word for word quotation is sometimes tough to get written down because none of us know shorthand, and we aren't that quick. And you want to make sure that if you're trying to use a quote, that you're using the exact words that the person used, right? If you're putting it in quotes, that's the only way to do it.
Sure, that's totally fair. And I do appreciate the addition under member responsibilities about needing the thoroughness of reports still and not using the camera footage as a substitute. So, okay, cool. The second one I have out of the original several that were updated is around the release of audio and video recordings, and I think this might need some bigger discussion in a later meeting, just because we didn't see any updates to the audio video recording release policy. But that piece of it and the transparency around releasing footage as appropriate to a suspect or a victim or lawyer or family in the case of terrible circumstances, I think we should discuss that. And I remember last time we talked about some Oregon laws that kind of specify when things can be released or not, but I'd love to bring that back onto the table to see what we can do for Tigard. And if there is an Oregon law, does Tigard want to be even more transparent than the Oregon law requires us to be? That's the big one in my view, is around release of footage to the appropriate parties.
Go ahead, Commander.
Yeah, so Jeff, that area in the policy specifically is the part where we were talking about how there's legislative changes coming. And so there's two things at play. The district attorney's office in Washington County has convened a work group that's going to talk about, that's one of the specific topics, about how they get the video and how we can work together to release video, because the video that the community is going to be most interested in is almost without a doubt going to be involved with the district attorney's office as well. So it's part of an active investigation. And the district attorney's office, in many cases, is like, absolutely not, nothing's going to be released until adjudication, right? So with the work group, we're hoping to try and strike a balance there. That also is part of the discussion with the state work group, and the senator whose name escapes me off the top of my head that I talked about a couple weeks ago when I brought these forward. He's out of Troutdale, but he's the head, or he's the chair of the committee that's going to be working on that. So there's law enforcement from throughout the state, and then senators and state representatives that are also going to be working on that to come up with language for body cam language. And part of that is going to discuss specifically the release of information or release of video, because we are interested in being able to release video when we have it, but we're often very limited because of the fact that it's part of an investigation, or that we're constrained by what law says. So when we can, we like to release that stuff. I tell you what, our PIO, she would absolutely love it if we could just release whatever we said. Oh, this is a great one to release, and we could do it. But oftentimes we're just limited because of the investigation itself. So totally get it. And that's why that hasn't changed, is because we know it's going to change. And rather than changing it when we've got these other balls in motion, because we know state law is likely to change, and we know that there's likely to be a policy change here within the county itself. Rather than rewriting the policy multiple times, because it's actually going to require a rewrite of our the records retention policy and the records release policy as well. So it's going to hit multiple areas. So rather than jump the gun and then have to change it multiple times, we decided that, let's hold off until these other work groups run their course.
Okay. Yeah, it totally makes sense, and appreciate you.
And we'll be able to report back on that, because my guess is that this stuff is going to happen over, say, the next 6 to 8 months, and we should have an answer over that time. So we'll keep you up to date.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And again, I appreciate all the hard work on this and all the updates you made.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Commander. And Valerie, please.
So it's not policy related. It's more about the body cams themselves that I had a question. And what I was wondering is, would it be possible for this group or for the police department on its website to do a side-by-side of what the old body cam footage would look like and what the new body cam footage would look like? Because I think that, we had a lot of discussion about how much they cost and how much better they are, but I think it might be good for people to be able to see, this is so much better and here's what it looks like. And so that's just a request. I don't know if you've already done something like that for the city council. If you have, I missed the meeting where you did that, but.
No, that's, and really, because the body cams that we had were just on our canine officers, the quality is really pretty similar, but we just didn't have very many people that had them, right? So we just had very few calls, very limited scope. When you only have 2 or 3 people that are wearing them versus everyone that's out on patrol, it's hit or miss as to whether or not you'll get it. Now, dash cam video compared to what we now have would actually be a cool comparison to make on a similar, we could just take a random run of the mill traffic stop and you could see the difference in quality. And I really would think, Valerie, where the difference would come would be taking one in inclement weather where it's raining, the old system versus the new system. And you'll laugh at what the old system looked like. And we thought it was pretty good, but the new system is just amazing. So that's something we could work on. I'll write a note and we'll put something like that together. That's actually a great idea. In fact, our PIO will probably love it.
Confidence inspiring for people to see, okay, here's what the spend looks like. So
yeah, I'll make a note.
All right. Any other comments on the body cam policy update? All right, seeing none, I'm going to move on to our next agenda item. This is actually a request from a board member that we review what the recommendation process actually is. It's been a long time since we've done a formal one. We only did one formal one, that was the body cam policy. So I'm going to pull up what we have written out explicitly in the charter, as well as the last policy, so we can go through the last recommendation, so we can kind of see how that goes. And then Valerie, I saw your hand go up and down. Are we good? Cool. So sharing my screen. And can everybody see that all right? Oh, sharing the wrong screen. Sorry, PowerPoint has decided it hates me right now. Okay, now can everybody see this all right? So what is written explicitly is the discussion recommendation. So this is in the first part. The goal is to provide an opportunity for the board to learn, then share perspectives with each other, and then collectively provide that feedback to the city council. And we do that in the following steps: discussion of a meeting topic, group formulation of a recommendation, which at least for defensive tactics, Valerie has kindly kicked us off with several recommendations. And then prior to finalizing a recommendation, each board member will have an opportunity to present their views, which will be documented in the recommendation. That is along with the final vote. In the voting process, the board can choose to vote on a recommendation. Decision-making strives for consensus, defined as 12 of 15, or in the case as we are now, down to member 75%. And alternatives, while not allowed to vote, are encouraged to be part of the process and provide comments along the way. Second part of the recommendation process was the board will make quarterly reports to City Council. So far, you have done 2 of those with a third one scheduled. There will be progress on the work plan and talking about any proposed recommendations. However, when the consensus-based recommendation is within the decision-making authority of the chief or the city manager, the chief or city manager can implement such recommendation without council action. And this is adopted by council. Council is on board with that. If the chief or city manager declines to implement a recommendation for any reason, it will be forwarded to the council for review and consideration. And then if the recommendation requires additional action, such as approval by the budget committee or bargaining with the union, the recommendation will not be effective until all approvals are received. And I had asked the chief before to kind of clarify when things might need to go before the approval or the budget committee for approval versus things that she can make operational decisions on. And she talked about how for one-time things that aren't giant expenses like body cam purchase, they're within her operational purview. But when something's going to be either a recurring expense or larger expense, it may go in front of the budget committee to ask for an extension of the budget, which is currently in process now, the budget process for the city. The final piece of the recommendation process is something that came out of our equity discussion. If we remember way back when, we read a book together and then we put up the Post-it notes and we came up with a lot of ideas about how we would incorporate racial equity into our work as a board. One of the recommendations that came out of that, and that is also in our charter, is that all recommendations to the city council will include a discussion of how that will make Tigard a better place for everyone in the community. An explicit call to action there. So that was the charter based recommendations. And then this is the first recommendation that came out of the board. You'll be able to see the template. But first, Valerie, please.
Yeah, and so I actually asked this be added as an agenda item because it was not clear to me, and if it was not clear to me, I assumed it was probably not clear to everybody, exactly how things that we thought would be important to implement would work their way through the system. And, so I think we've had a lot of really good collaborative discussions with the department, and the body cam discussions, for example, I think are a really good example of how we can add value to, at least thinking of some additional things and pulling in some additional experiences and perspectives. But the actual process of, okay, we propose something, then what, was not clear from either. It wasn't clear to me that we adopted it, and it wasn't clear to me exactly what it was, because, and so if, the lawyer's having trouble reading the process, then I assume that other people might be confused. So, my understanding of what the process is, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about this, is that we gather information, we have a discussion about it, we have proposals, everybody has the opportunity to say, this is how I feel about the proposal, and then we take a vote on it. And then, to the extent that that it is within the city manager, and I assume that Eduardo and the other staff here are representing the city manager's authority, or the police chief's authority, and she's been fantastic about participating, and has Commander McDonald and Officer Nunn show up to these meetings as well to participate. As long as it's within their scope of authority, then we wouldn't necessarily need to make recommendations to city council unless there was something that was beyond the scope of their authorities, such as a larger budget ask. So that's my understanding of where we are on this. And I don't think that we ever expressly voted on this. I think that this is what a lot of the understanding has been in the background, but I just wanted us to be clear about this, because I think, as we move forward in this process, we're going to have more things that we're going to want to address. And so I put together a discussion draft for people to consider and to talk about with respect to defensive tactics. But before we even get to that, I wanted to have a preliminary discussion just to make sure we were on the same page about what the process would look like.
Yeah, I think that was a wonderful way of restating the process. And I will say, for the body cam recommendations, because it was so organic of a policy draft, it did result in a slightly different process throughout. But definitely, especially the recommendations that you brought forward, Valerie, in your draft, will follow this process. And Liz, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly, we had quite an extensive discussion about this at council, and what we were interested in was making sure that the Public Safety Advisory Board had ultimate, I don't know if I want to use the word authority, but permission to come up with recommendations that they thought would be appropriate. And we also didn't want to take away the chief's ability to be really the head of operating the department. She's in charge of operating the department, and it isn't typical for the council to get over involved in what those policies look like necessarily. We might be interested in outcomes, but we don't really want to get involved in policy. So we had discussions about a couple of things. First of all, the reason that we talked about it being a consensus is we wanted to encourage discussion instead of, okay, we're going to take a vote. Are you for green or blue? We thought there might be some more fluid recommendations. Yes, the general consensus was this, but there were folks on the board that thought we should look at this. And so that's why we wanted to go with a consensus rather than more of a strict vote. Obviously, you have a consensus on a larger number of people. And then for the council, we, as Kim did a good job of explaining, sometimes we're the only ones that have the authority to make a decision. The body cam worked pretty well because we just moved some money. I mean, so that worked pretty well. There was support there. And then sometimes it might be an ordinance or something that we have to change, and we're willing to look at that. So those were the discussions that we had about this. We wanted to have the most dynamic conversations here and not feel like the group has to advocate to the council for everything. We also wanted to ensure that the department has the ability to operate effectively by making the changes that are appropriate at their level, and then have the council open to considering anything that would be more in our purview. So I hope that helps set some context.
Thank you. This was really helpful to hear the council's perspective. Yes, John, please.
Really quick question. Is there we talk about in terms of when it affects the budget and it goes to the council, what is the dollar amount that's okay, we need to go to the council to discuss?
I want to say if it's a capital purchase, it's, I think, the 500,000 now, Shelby. But sometimes it's just because it's not authorized. So for example, we want to do something with an FTE or something. If it's not authorized in the department budget, then we need to make a change. Sometimes there's available funding and it's, you know, a like kind of thing. So they have the authority to make those changes, but it has to be authorized and it can't exceed the department director's authority. So.
Thank you.
Did I get the number wrong, Commander?
Well, I was just going to say, I'd love to be able to tell the chief she can just spend up to 500 grand on whatever she wants. I think she'd love that. I really, for us, when we look at any added expense, we have to evaluate where in the budget, our current budget, we can get that money from. Almost without fail. And we do that all the time. It's a constant balancing act. Our business manager will say, whoa, time out. And then we have to figure out where that money is going to come from. So sometimes that does result in us going to city council, maybe at a quarterly, budget update, asking for additional funds to cover certain things. And Councilor Newton is familiar with those because they come 4 times a year or 3 times a year, I guess. And so I guess to answer that question about Valerie, about what's the dollar amount, it really actually depends on what exactly it is we're talking about. And it could be a very small dollar amount up to really needing to go to council to talk to them about it. Depending on what it is it a one-time deal? Is it $5,000 we can find from somewhere else in the budget? For example, things like that. So, anyhow, there's a variety of factors that go into it that we have to weigh as we're balancing our budget.
Thank you, Commander. And Nick, please.
Yes, thank you. I think most of you are aware I was late to this party. I was like 4 months into this before I was put on this advisory board. But my question is kind of for everyone, is the recommendation process for this advisory board the same process for other advisory boards? Are we following in line with other ones that the city has? Does anyone know?
Shelby, that's probably a question for you. Or Liz.
It is a little bit different for this board. Most of the boards that it's really clear that it's either going to be a department recommendation going to, like in the park board, they might make a recommendation to the public works director for something they're going to consider. But most of the changes that they make do come to council. So we don't have a definition in terms of, okay, certain recommendations go to the chief or the city manager and others will go straight to council. Most other boards and committees don't have such detailed bylaws in terms of recommendations. So they would make a recommendation to council. Like the park board right now, they're looking at making a recommendation to the council on how they would organize the department. And that will come to council. So it's not as defined for other boards and committees.
Shelby, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I think Liz covered it. I would say the charge of this board is a lot different than most of our other advisory boards. And so I know there's not a good comparison because the mission of this board is just different and the structure. Most other boards are not involved in policy development, I guess, in the way that this board is. And so that just lends itself to a different decision-making process.
Thank you. And Valerie.
So I just wanted to put a pin in something because I don't think, from my perspective, communication with council is going to be ongoing, even if we're not going to be making recommendations to them. My expectation is that, the good work that was done on the body cam policy will be discussed at our next update, for example. But, we also don't want to put the department in the position of robbing Peter to pay Paul. If there's something that we think is important, it may be that there's a consensus as between the department and this group, which the department is serving as a very important part of, to city council, because there is some additional funding that we think is important for a program. I don't want us to take money away from other equally valid programs to do these things. So that I just wanted to put a pin in that, because I think it's important for us to keep in mind that, although the department is already sort of juggling finances and pulling $5,000 from here or wherever, this is important, and city council has made it a priority. So that may come up with a cost.
But really quick, I just want a really quick follow-up, Valerie, but that's something that council's going to be looking at to the department for. We're going to be asking them. We knew going forward what the situation was with the body cams, that we were going to be able to, I'll use the, move money. So, and that worked. But yeah, we're always going to be looking to the department to make sure that this is a priority. We might move money from someplace else and not from the police budget to fund something.
Sure, exactly. That's the only thing that I wanted to mention, is because, I think that to the extent that we have recommendations, we shouldn't view their implementation as being at the expense of other police programs necessarily. So.
Thank you. And Sean, please.
Oh, just a general comment about policy. This board is unique, and I knew it was unique when the Tigard first started talking about it. Bringing a bunch of us that don't have expertise in a lot of these matters. I'm one of them. That's why I live here, so that they hire people like Shelby to figure all this stuff out. And so I just think that if we're gonna make policy, I would just want to apply some basic, some basic principles, like, is there a business case for it? Is it impactful? What are the pros and cons, long-term impacts? Done a SWOT analysis. Are we looking at everything? Are we looking at root causes? Or are we, just looking at something really specific? And does that end up being the best resource for the community? And does it give the right message back to our community members and our police department as we go forward and after this concludes? And I just think I've been on these before, and just sometimes you just find this breakthrough moment and everybody just goes, aha, and there's this consensus. And the body cams is a great example of that. There's precedence. There was support. You had nearly unanimous city support, union support, and it was a really good thing. And sometimes we see things, we may trip into more things that we need policy, and there could be some great things ahead of us. I was on budget oversight committee or community oversight, or I forget. There's a couple different committees for Tigard 12th School District. The middle school teachers were talking about a new block schedule. And out of that, we found out that the kids in Spanish immersion taking Spanish classes were not taking PE. So you should have seen the look on the school board faces when they realized that was happening, because that was inadvertently segregating all the classes. So this is not, nobody even knew that was happening, but yet it came out. It was this breakthrough moment, and it was this aha moment. And that's the kind of things I hope for out of a committee like this. So anyways, just a general comment, and take it for what it's worth. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sean. And I do think that this group has, in the last 9 months, put a lot of rigor into recommendations and thoughts and questions. I know, especially with the body cam policy, Jeff and Valerie and Patty and Justin and Jimmy all did a lot of work on that. So I just want to applaud everybody for how much rigor has gone into all these conversations. With that, I think we can move into our next agenda item. So we had left these continuing conversations around defensive tactics, use of force, qualified immunity. Valerie sent some wonderful, I think, jumping off points for discussion about recommendations for defensive tactics. And what I'd like to propose, we haven't done this in a while, and I think it's helpful to making sure everybody gets to speak and to engage with each other, is moving into breakout rooms for discussion. I'm seeing some nodding. And so we'll move into breakout rooms 3 for discussion around the topics that Valerie had sent, but also the topics that we had ongoing. I'm going to call on Valerie in a second, but I'm also going to ask her to offer a little bit of context for the recommendations that she sent out to the group. We'll move, let's see, we've got 40 minutes left in the meeting. So we'll go into the breakouts for 10 minutes. And then we'll do a 10-minute report out. So each group will report out individually. And then I need to leave enough time because we did have one other request from the board, from a couple board members to present this evening. But Valerie, please.
So I also am not sure that we have enough voting members on the board present to actually vote on anything today. So I think this is a preliminary discussion of things. And I really put together these points as a jumping off point. So I'm not emotionally tied to any of these. You know, if you want to wordsmith them or you don't agree with them, that is absolutely okay. You know, I wanted to provide something for people to react to, because I think it can be very easy to talk about these things in the abstract sometimes, which doesn't move us forward. But, you know, I would ask him that we have a item for the next meeting as well to talk about this discussion, when hopefully we'll be able to have some of our missing board members attend, perhaps at the beginning of the session.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have 13 of 15 voting members this evening, but we'll definitely continue that conversation next meeting.
Okay. You know, so we had some discussions sort of offline, casually, and then, you know, some of the things came up when we had the representatives from the department speak with us about current training practices and procedures, that, you know, I thought, well, is that sufficient? I know that every time we ask for more training, it's as a burden on the department to, you know, find time to make that happen. But, you know, I put together these recommendations and recitals, and there was a question that came up about the recitals and, you know, what is the point of recitals? And the point of recitals, and Shelby may want to weigh in on this, is that, you know, to give context to the, you know, how we are coming to a decision. If there are other things that we need to consider that we think are important in making the recommendations that we do, then we should have them in the recitals of whatever we're going to be recommending as a group. And so I put together some recitals, you know, to recognize the concern that I have personally about, you know, some of the statistics that we went over in the last session. And I know that there are reasons for the statistics looking the way they do that may relate to involvement with TriMet and may relate to involvement with people who move through the department or move through the city. You know, in evidencing that, for example, the African-American population experiences what seems to be a statistically disproportionate level of use of force incidents. You know, when we talked with, and I apologize, I can't remember the officer's name who came and spoke with us last time, but, you know, it became clear that there were reasons for that. And I think it's important when we're talking about transparency that the data be presented in a way that is timely and that is, you know, that is useful in helping people understand where some of those differences may break down, that may not have the benefit of participation in this and may not be willing to troll through it, you know, watch all the videos that we've put together about, you know, our discussions on that. So, you know, so that is what the second recommendation is. The first recommendation that, you know, TPD and city staff work with community leaders and educational specialists to develop cross-cultural communication techniques to reduce those use of force incidents. And, I think that there are techniques, and I think we've talked about some of them, but I think there are probably even more out there that some educational specialists may be able to direct us towards to, help facilitate better communication and interpretation within communities, because you can say one thing, right? But someone who comes from a different cultural context, and this is why most of us are on this board, is someone who comes from a different cultural context may not interpret the same way. And so, so my recommendation there is that, we work to continuously improve communication techniques, help give officers the tools to avoid being misunderstood. And that should have an impact on reducing these use of force incidents within our minority communities, be they, our citizen minority communities or the communities that, as Justin said, might be traveling from other areas of the metro area to, shop at Washington Square, shop at our downtown, eat at the restaurants downtown. We want these people to feel safe in our communities. And if our officers have better tools and they have the tools necessary to interact with those communities, those opportunities are going to develop. My third recommendation on what got circulated is to add an additional 4 hours. And this is probably where the budget ask is going, one of the budget asks is going to be. Because, as we were talking about use of force, it became clear that, there's 4 hours of defensive tactics training twice a year, which becomes spaced out, right? And so what you really want is you want officers who have muscle memory to act in the way that best reflects city policy and procedures. And I think that the way that you develop muscle memory is by doing actions more often. And so your automatic reaction is to do the right thing, as opposed to when you're in a fear reaction to react in a way that may be inconsistent. And I think that'll go towards the internal investigation that the department's going to conduct. Is, it may be that these are self-reinforcing things to the extent that additional training or additional reaction or having plotted out what could happen in each situation is better. Now, the final recommendation has to do with emergency communication strategies, and this is really disaster preparedness. And I think that the city did a good job of communicating in the wake of the Maldonado shooting earlier this year, and a good job of communicating, sort of what was going on with the riots in real time. I watched all of that footage, the interviews on TV and everything. But I think that I got the impression that there could have been better modeling out of, okay, let's reach out immediately to the communities that may be impacted. Let's have our networks and communication lines established. And there are people who specialize in this. We hire them for clients from time to time to try and, and Kim probably has some thoughts about this as well, but, who it's their job to help people map out, okay, if this happens, then here's what the systems that are going to be in place. Because again, it's organizational muscle memory. So the idea that so something happens and everybody knows what to do, so that there is a fast response, so that, the social media stuff is taken care of, so that people who need to be involved are contacted. So, like I said, I'm okay if you disagree with any of these, if you want to wordsmith any of them, or if you think that I'm overstating things. But I did want to give us something to react to and talk about, because I think that, we've had a lot of discussions about this, and use of force is really, from my perspective, where the rubber meets the road. In a lot of the incidents that sort of necessitated or spurred the city council to constitute this board. So that's all I have to say. My kind of rambling, all I have to say.
Thank you for the context, Valerie. We are short on time, so this is going to be, like Valerie suggested, a very preliminary conversation. But we are still going to go up to the breakout rooms. We're going to spend about 10 minutes there, and then we'll report out very briefly after that. So I'm going to send everybody to your rooms.
I want to see that rainbow, Shelby.
I can see blue sky. That's nice.
Yeah, were you in Tigard?
No, I'm in downtown Portland.
No, Shelby.
Oh, Shelby.
Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm in Beaverton.
Ah, okay.
So we're still waiting on one group.
Shelby, why is it so light where you are?
Because it is so sunny. It is incredible lighting outside. There's 2 double rainbows and the sun is just reflecting on the clouds. It's incredible. It
So
really
dark
is.
and rainy here. I keep looking at your window thinking, where is she?
I
She
know,
made
it's
herself
amazing.
jealous in our breakout room because she was looking at this beautiful rainbow. We're looking at pouring down rain.
Sun is brighter over in Beaverton, I suppose.
It's so weird. It's also a really orangey light, so it's extra bright. It's amazing.
It's also orange, but it's also pouring down rain. and
Pouring,
it's
yes.
so loud.
Yeah, it's pouring rain where I am, so.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I know I enjoyed going back into the breakout rooms. I think we'll continue to do that for some of these more in-depth discussions. I think it's really helpful to get more voices. Which group would like to present out first? And I will say, please keep it down, dirty, and brief, because we are running low on time, but we will have plenty of time in the next meeting to continue the discussions. So raise your hand if you would like to go. Emilio, please.
Yeah, super quick elevator pitch. 2 main things that we touched on was the importance of looking at traffic stops specifically, since it's just such a major part of police interactions with the community, and especially since the past incident was semi-traffic stop, not really, they were in a motor vehicle, but like, you know, that type of situation dynamic. The other type of communication we were talking about was with minority community specifically, because we know that minorities, both as high schoolers and as people of color, are not likely to go and reach out to a city council compared to like if they have a community member that they know or a close friend that they know that can like communicate better. So just making sure that we have more outreach in the community and have like specific designated people that people can go to in their own existing communities. Sorry for repeating communities a lot. Next person.
Thanks, Emilio. Good discussion from your group. And Patty, please.
Okay, so we, with respect to number 1, in terms of community voices, we discussed integrating voices from the Muslim Educational Trust here in Tigard, and also from some folks, the National Civic Leadership Forum, who just this week had the Asian American Unity Coalition 2-day session. And so just reaching out to them as well in terms of voices. In terms of number 3, we talked about the potential cost out of pocket, number 1, and then that's increasing the hours from 8 to 12, and also not specific financial cost, but what does this take away from? What other kinds of sessions or time on patrol, et cetera, does that take away from? And then with respect to number 4, just, and I don't know if Shelby might want to jump in here, the right buttons in Shelby, can you qualify that right buttons for me? Because I'm not sure I can speak as articulately as you did.
Sure. So one of the references was to the mayor and city council and kind of how that communication is coordinated. And so making sure that that also includes the city manager's office, the city communications team, and just how the threads of that kind of go a long ways.
Thank you. All right, and I think that's up for our group.
Summary, Patty. There's one group left. Whoever your spokesperson is, please go.
I'll go for it, I guess, since no one's jumping in. I think at a high level, we agreed with the premise of all of these with the purpose around equity, transparency, preparedness, and communication. I think where we had a lot of our discussion was on the specifics of each number and just taking the purpose at a high level, and then relying on the experts to figure out how to actually make that happen. Like, is 4 hours enough? Should we go 8 more or 12 more? What does that cost? And then kind of like to your point, Patty and Shelby, around how communications work within the city with the media and that kind of stuff. But we agreed at a high level with the purpose. And please, anyone else jump in if you want to add anything.
I would like to see content out of the recitals to frame in more of the statistics about the calls, number of calls for service, number of responses, number of use of force. I don't know if we need to go to as far as listing each incident and what exactly happened. But I would like to see something framed up a little bit better, just so that later on, whoever is reading this, can see the full context.
Thank you. It sounds like we have some rich discussion brewing for next time. Valerie, please.
So one thing that I was thinking might be super helpful, Sean, is if you wanted to propose some language for the recitals that we could read and react to in the next session. Because I think, does it take the form of attaching an exhibit? What are you thinking? So I think that would be really helpful for me to understand what you're trying to get to there.
Thanks, Valerie. I would be happy to do that. But I don't think it would probably fit in this document, but one of the things I think about when I hear about use of force and when it's required is how do you get to that point? And we have some violence happening in our classrooms. There's starting to become some more awareness of it. There's a lot of legislation actually happening, really good legislation. We haven't talked about it, but I've been tracking it. It's really good stuff. Things like tracking the number of room clears.
Right, but Sean, I think, the purpose of this board is to look at disparate impact in a equity context, right? Not just focused on the schools. So if there are statistics that we need to be capturing, with respect to race and equity in, use of force incidents in our community, one of the things that really stood out to me when we had the presentation last week was the involvement of TriMet, for example. So, should that be presented differently or than, ordinary use of force incidents? The schools are obviously important. We had some discussion in our group with Emilio about, the disparate impact maybe on student populations. But, I think broader use of force incidents in the school system may be beyond the scope of this group.
Yep. Thank you very much. And like I said, rich discussion for next time. I do want to make sure we have just a little bit of time here at the end. I know Liz and Danny had a proposal for the group. I do apologize that we are running short on time, but I want to make sure you have the floor.
I think we can make this quick. Danny and I agreed that I would start and then he could add in. This is basically driven out of the discussions that Danny and I have been having around an initial discussion we had where we talked about his observation of an apparent disconnect between what the work of the Public Safety Advisory Board and the awareness of the faith community. He's the social justice coordinator at St. Anthony's, and he's finding that his congregants are generally not aware of what we're doing. And that concerned us. They're not aware of the work we're doing, which is to improve the lived experience of all people in Tigard, where all people feel safe and believe they will receive equitable treatment. That concerned me as well. And so we had some conversations about how we could more formally intentionally commit to bridging that gap. So I took the liberty of contacting Mayor Snyder, and he is open to a resolution or some other action as recommended by the Public Safety Advisory Board to more formalize that commitment. And so what Danny and I are proposing is a resolution that we would present to the City Council for adoption that would commit to more formal outreach to the faith community. This would include an invitation to all faith leaders for perhaps a town hall type discussion, offers to meet with individual congregation leadership teams to talk with them about the work we're doing, and then really more importantly, the thing that I'm excited about, and Danny and I talked about, is actually going to churches, synagogues, temples, whatever, and meeting with people in their environment where they'd be comfortable to talk about the work of the Public Safety Advisory Board and with them and get their feedback on their lived experience, their concerns, and their hopes for our community. So to close, Danny and I had a meeting with Father John on Friday to just kind of run it by him, and he thought it was great. He expressed support, and what he really talked a lot about was his view of the importance of the faith community engaging with the broader community and creating that bridge. And he talked a lot about making sure that everybody feels valued and respected. So if we had the support of the Public Safety Advisory Board, Danny and I would take it on ourselves to prepare a resolution to be reviewed by you, and hopefully we could present it sometime in October. And I'll let Danny say anything he wanted to say, but I'm most excited about the opportunity because, you know, my goal is to talk personally to everybody that lives here and find out anything they want to tell us about how that we can make them feel more safe and respected here. So Danny, you want to say anything?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think the only thing I'll say is, you know, I expressed that opinion based on my limited experience and kind of hunch, really. Above all, I have no data to support this, but generally, I am all about bridge building and connecting, at least my faith community, to the things happening outside of our church walls, right? Because as people of faith, we're called not just to pray, but we're also called to put our prayer into action. And the best ways to do that is by getting involved and participating in your local city and town. And, you know, this idea of, you know, a faith leader town hall, it really excites me. And I think it's something that I haven't seen since I've been at St. Anthony's. And just excited for that opportunity. I think, like Liz said, I mean, there's so many points of connection here with the faith community, especially around respecting life and making sure everybody feels valued and respected. And I just think we haven't leveraged those opportunities to make those connections in a more proactive way. And I know we're all here, are part of our responsibility to do that outreach, but it's kind of a lot to put that on one person. You know, and I think it would be great if we had other outreach strategies.
Liz and Danny, I would love to connect with you because in our breakout room, I talked about a meeting I attended. I was invited. That was a group after 9/11, but it was just it was the Muslim Educational Trust, a local rabbi, a priest, several other ministers, and it was about this very thing. So I think they would be very, very excited to connect with us. So I'd love to talk with you about that before I reach out to Wajid.
And we're hoping those of you that are interested would also want to go out and, you know, participate and meet with some groups or some individuals in the faith community. So
Valerie, please.
So I know we're almost at time, and I love this idea. I think the more people that we can get out and talk to, the better. My only ask would be that you run whatever proposal, maybe by Shelby first, just so that we don't have any viewpoint discrimination concerns as it comes before us. You know, we certainly don't want to be excluding people to the extent that they don't have faith and they're not part of a faith community. So that would be my only ask. But I'm more than happy to participate in whatever outreach we can do. So I love this idea.
Great. And Sean, you'll be our last comment for this evening.
Thanks. It's an exciting opportunity to apply this equity lens here. And, you know, this actually looks like it could do some good. And we heard a lot of support tonight. And I want to just make sure that just as we move forward, we're thinking about, you know, impacts to our law enforcement community and just how we message this to bring our community together, you know, as we move forward and as we see this thing, you know, turn into something that's going to be beneficial to everybody. So thanks.
Thank you, Sean. So Liz, Danny, Patty, I will leave it in your hands to draft away and to let city staff and especially Shelby know if you need any support.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
And what can we look forward to?
Oh yeah, that's me. What can we look forward? We will look forward to continuing a conversation on recommendations. We do still have one use of force topic left from the police department on vehicle use, police operated vehicles. So we'll have that coming up as well. And then we'll hear the latest from Liz, Danny, and Patty on their resolution and outreach to the faith community.
Great, thank you. And I really enjoyed tonight's meeting. I really appreciate everyone's comment and all the work that was done in terms of the policy of the body cam. Thank you, commanders, staff, and board members for really putting our suggestion into the policy. And Valerie, thank you for the suggestion, the recommendation. The breakout group rooms was really vibrant in terms of discussions. And I appreciate in terms of Danny and Liz for bringing the proposal to create that resolution. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, it was a great discussion tonight, and I look forward to our next meeting. And with that, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Valerie. 1 second.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion or opposition? Hearing none, I wish everyone a great night, and the meeting's adjourned.
Good night, everybody.